Hi, everybody. So, a little bit about who we are. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. My name is Justin Hoffman. I'm the VP of Development at TheStreet. And for people who don't know TheStreet, what we're talking about is basically a group of financial sites, which for me is really different. We have, obviously, our flagship site of TheStreet, but what most people don't know about TheStreet is that we actually have a lot of smaller sites. It's a whole network of little niche trading sites for people down on Wall Street. And we had started about 2 years ago on our trail of, we know we wanted something new. We had legacy systems that were really, really institutionalized patterns of building, the way things got launched, everything from top to bottom. Some really old systems and really diverse teams. So where we were was really messy on day one. I think, and a lot of companies, just like TheStreet, are kind of in a similar position of, you have some really old technology, you have some really old CMS systems, really old commerce systems, really old newsletter distribution systems, right? You can talk up and down the board of old technology and going new. So, what we started to do at TheStreet was really take a look at who we had on board. We had a couple of really good guys that knew PHP, and one of our sites at TheStreet, a smaller site called mainstreet.com, was actually built in Drupal 5, and that for me got the conversation going with a lot of our business partners. We had a lot of proprietary systems going on all these little different sites, but Main Street seemed to be working really well. So that's kind of where we started. We sat with the guys that managed that site, got a lot of feedback from the editors because we had a really diverse and split team, and we saw some of the successes that came off that, and that's really where our story started. So time for a change. It was the perfect timing. We couldn't go one more year on our old systems. We're paying way too much to keep it up, to keep it going, maintaining it. I think at one point we were doing more maintaining than actual building, which was just an awful place to be in. So what we decided to do was move on. I think every company must get to that point where you hit that plateau and you kind of don't really know what to do next. You all know you want to go to a new CMS, but what do you do? Where do you start? Where do you kind of look to go? So where we kind of started was, taking a look at all of our shortcomings. What I've mentioned before, obviously we had proprietary CMS, not one that was built on the outside that companies were using, but our own internal thing we called Rosebud was basically built by our guys, maintained by our guys, real great for job security for the guys on the floor, but at the end of the day, the complaints grew to the point where we couldn't get anything done. I couldn't get any new sites built. I could barely maintain the ones that we had up. It's a really bad place to be in, especially when you're dealing with limited resources, limited bandwidth. We're not a big company at TheStreet. We have 15 developers, a small sysops team, a small QA team, and some project managers. For the most part, it's a pretty small company. Trying to do a lot of things with all of these sites that we've acquired. You just can't possibly do and maintain all of these sites at once and move them all forward. That's basically an impossible task. So information overload, right? Different systems, different data warehouses, is just kind of everywhere. And I think Jeff had mentioned before in his keynote, and I assume it comes up for everybody, is the one-off integrations were out of control. And basically that's kind of where I came in to take a look at what was going on there at TheStreet and really get a little more of a unified direction going for the company as a whole. It was way too diverse, way too split, and like I said, at the end of the day, we basically got nothing done for a long time. So change takes forever, and it does. There's no way we're going to flip a switch and relaunch 15 to 20 websites overnight. That would be a huge failure. We all knew going into it we wanted to start small. We wanted to start with a really good pilot program building off of what we had with mainstreet.com, a really good Drupal site that was getting really great feedback. The audience was growing. The editors loved to manage it. It's really simple and easy to use. And that's kind of where we went with this, of just rethinking the model at TheStreet of what was working and really where we want to be. So a couple of things we did to kind of set us on this course, and I get this question a lot from a lot of companies that are sort of where we were at TheStreet a few years ago, of like, well, what do you do? How do you go? Where are you starting from? And really, we started with Agile, which for me is related to Drupal, because what we're talking about with Agile development is we don't want to go big bang, right? I don't want to spend 6 months mired down doing Java development, putting this thing on staging and everybody hating it, and then spending 6 more months trying to build it and get all the defects out of the way. By the time we launch this thing a year out, all the requirements have changed at that point anyway, right? So it's the model that everybody's seen before, trying to build a big website of. It doesn't work. There's really no clean way to do it. So I had spent years at Nielsen, and they had brought in Agile as a methodology, that we wanted to do. And of course, I'm a doubting Thomas kind of guy, so I questioned everything up front. And today, for me, there's really no other way to build a website or any kind of application development without doing it agile. And that was important for us before we hit Drupal, because we can't just hit it and relaunch this thing. You really have to have a standardized best practice in terms of how you're building things and how you want to present things to your stakeholders and product owners. The agile piece for us went a long way to pushing Drupal forward, and I really couldn't reinforce that enough of, having one of the guys build a whole site and deploy it, that's really not what we want at all. We want to build small pieces, and we want an infrastructure that lets us do that in an intelligent way so that I can launch something and push a little piece of it live and keep building on it as I go. For me, that's really important. And that was sort of one of the directions that we chose Drupal. We had looked at, obviously before Drupal, we wanted to do a full evaluation process, and we had looked at a lot of different CMS systems. We looked at WordPress, looked at Joomla, really liked Plone. They're all good, they're all kind of similar, but something about Drupal stood apart, which was the community aspect of it. Not that the other systems weren't as good as Drupal, or maybe even better, but they were missing that piece for me of the community-wide development core that's being contributed by people like you guys out here. I didn't want to rely on my team alone to do the developments alone. It's the wrong move in general. So that was one of our big pieces of going Drupal is I know I can launch it in pieces. I can do a real agile methodology and apply it to Drupal. And Drupal's kind of built around that. It wants you to do it in small pieces. It doesn't really want that big bang. Of course we could do it, but I like that the module aspect of it lets us do that in an intelligent way. So once we kind of went the course of going Drupal and we knew that's what we wanted, we had to basically revisit our whole hardware platform. We had a legacy stack of Java sites, of .NET sites. We're paying huge amounts of money for Oracle licenses. It's out of control. And at the end of the day, part of us going to Drupal, that played a really big part of it. We're going to retire a lot of hardware, and I'll talk about this in a little bit afterwards. But that was really important for us. There has to be some kind of cost savings for the business side going to one CMS. I need to retire my other things. I need to shut them off. And so that was basically where we started, and when I put down here kind of getting our feet wet, we had basically just built a couple of practice things. Obviously, we had our Main Street site, which is a live functioning site, fully maintained by a group of editors, live publishing every day. The site's doing really well. But we had gone ahead and just built a couple of little small things in Drupal just to kind of prove the case. We knocked out like a blog in a few weeks. Had it live. The editors loved it. I was able to train a couple of non-web savvy editors on this thing in just a day or two. It's simple, it's easy, and I assume that's why a lot of people are looking at Drupal. It's the training both on the development side and on the management side of it is pretty light, right? It's pretty straightforward. So as we move forward, what we decided to do was, like I said, we had a lot of different systems. We had basically a lot of Java sites and .NET sites, and as such, I had a lot of Java and .NET developers. That's not going to work going to Drupal at all, right? So we had partnered and brought in Lullabot, who came on site with us for 2 weeks, and we had done some pretty hardcore training. We basically locked down our development cycles for those 2 weeks, and we just did core training for that time, and that went a long, long way for us. Especially, we're lucky at TheStreet. We have some really good developers, guys who are just, anxious to learn and grow their development core. And without that on-site training, I don't think it would have been a successful project, actually, because at the end of the day, we want to grow the system. We want to do some cool, robust things with it. But if you don't have the talent on site to do it, it's really never going to happen. The Drupal community is pretty tight. The good developers are out there. And we really wanted to take our guys and train them. And that's kind of the direction that we took of taking our in-house team, training them up. And there was some transition along with that, of course. Some guys didn't want to do PHP, so they left. Some people want in, and we grow the team. So there was a natural transition as part of our Drupal migration, both system-wide and people-wide too. And I think that's part of the Drupal story as well. You need Drupal people to build Drupal. I talked about iterative development before, but that was critical, right? Because what we want to do is, with one of our Drupal sites, we don't want to do the big bang, right? And that's kind of what we did at TheStreet, and a lot of companies do for a long time, or going the kind of like the waterfall methodology of you're building this really big thing all at once, and you're trying to launch it all at once, and right away it's going to fail, right? Just saying that right off the bat, that's never going to work. So I really liked with Drupal, what we're really talking about is Drupal core, right? The ability to publish content and do it easily and get a site up and be able to file content to it. Done, great, there's immediate benefit to that. and then prioritize in some new features. Obviously on day one with any product owner, any stakeholder, they want the world, right? You want everything on the site. It's got to have the bells and whistles. I love the conversation on day one that I had with every client of, we really like iGoogle, and I want to move my stuff around and save it and customize it. Wonderful, great, but you have to be realistic with what you can build if you want to get stuff done. When we're looking at the street, 15, 20 websites, and we got to get these things rebuilt, and we got to get them done fast. We really don't have time to sit around with individual stakeholders and talk about key little features that might take me 3-4 months to build. We want to talk about core, something I could roll out quickly to all these sites, get a little more bang for my buck and get some stuff up quick, and then iteratively roll out modules and things that I can use and share them across these sites without doing the one-off kind of stuff. We're lucky at the street. Obviously, the sites, I have access to them all, so they're all maintained and done on site with us at the street. But that's really important for me that we want to take these modules up front. We know we want to share them. We know they're common. And especially at the street world, these are all financial sites. When we had started, I was not really able to find too many financial sites using Drupal, so I'd like to look at the street as kind of like, really pushing that on the financial side. We have a lot of guys coming to us now kind of looking at what we're doing with our sites and how we're building them, how we're maintaining them. They're seeing a lot of these modules shared, kind of rolling out. The feedback has been really good. So what we did kind of going into the first project was discovery, of course, a little bit of what I talked about before. We didn't want to work with our stakeholders and start building up huge requirement sets for each of these sites. They're all a little unique in their own way. But instead, we really focus on discovery for the core. What do all these sites have in common? What's the common ground of these things in addition to just publishing and some financial widgets? And that's kind of where we started at the street, of putting this stuff down on paper, making sure that we had at least the common sense of what we wanted core to be and where we wanted that rollout position to start and begin. So we knew what we wanted, no doubt in my mind. Everybody was on the same place at the street. We all know we want to move forward, right? We want to get off our systems. We want to start retiring these things. We can't maintain them. The guys are psyched about going Drupal, but we really needed that proof of concept. Main Street was a smaller website. It's under 1 million hits a month. Really wasn't enough to convince our senior management and our executive team, including Jim Kramer, that this was the right move for us. They really needed to buy into this because this is going to be the long road for us for the next 3 to 5 years. Everything's going to be built on this. We're going to be hiring based on this. So that proof of concept really needed to be good, and I needed to blow people away with it. Our team wasn't ready to take it all in. I mentioned Lullabot before, but that really wasn't enough. As good as it is to bring the guys in and get hands-on training, well, that's great if you don't have anything to put that to use. At the time when we did our training, it was before we built our first site. So it was a little bit ahead of the game on it. It was a little bit of a precursor, but no doubt in my mind it was the right thing to do. The guys, the training that they received up front before we started building, obviously so important. You just wouldn't be able to do it any other way. So the next step for us was Treehouse. Lullabot was great, did some on-site training, but you know what? For the first site up, we really wanted to make sure we did it right. We really needed to be 100% on this. Everybody had to believe in it in our company. There's just no way I was going to get by here if our editor-in-chief put up a red flag saying, no way, this isn't going to happen. We needed to move forward and we needed to do it quick. So in came Treehouse.
Okay. This was a new word for us in this presentation, and I'm calling it the Facilitative Model. And one of the things that struck me when I got to the street, unlike many of the other organizations that I had worked with on deployments, is that they were very ready. I was so shocked. I was like, oh my God, they're committing to the training. They're committing to the hardware upgrades. They're, at every level, they're committing to Agile. That is just, for those of you who have worked on big implementations, you know that not everybody kind of hits every single point. This organization had hit every single point, and we were like, wow. So one of the things that, I had decided in going in working with this group is that this was not going to be a situation where we were going to be just a standard vendor to them, that we were going to come in and build a site, that we were essentially helping this organization move to Drupal as a platform, build their capacity. What was going to make us successful is when we were able to leave. So that was an interesting model, and it was a facilitative model, and that we were there to strengthen their organization, strengthen their teams, help them build long-term processes, and we were all doing that, of course, within the context of key challenges. So not only did we have the big vision of supporting the organization, they did have a pilot, and they wanted that pilot in 2 months. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you're doing everything right here, but then you're going to give us a short deadline,
Right.
and you want to get it out the door. No problem. There were a number of process inefficiencies as we start to, that they were not perfect, and as we were not either, but we did uncover some difficulties in how things were being handed off from one phase to the next. One key area that we found a problem was in the requirements gathering. There was what we call a gap of some sort in terms of they didn't have any business analyst on site. So we actually brought somebody in to fill that gap, to start doing some analysis and working with their business units as well. But once again, it was reminding them that they were going to have to build that capacity into their organization, and that was not something that they could rely on us for, long term, but we did do it. I think we were coming in at a time at the street where the business was a little angry that stuff was taking so long, that they hadn't had, all the successes yet that we're going to talk about, but they were still very angry. So there was a great amount of disconnect, and I remember often getting alarmist kind of yelling emails from some of their business, I'll just say one particular business member, and that at that point it became deciding, what the right pilot would be, and that at the street there are two types of products. There's their free stuff, like the street itself, the flagship property, and then they have a lot of premium products for which they sell, and that's a lot of their revenue dollars. How much was it? 60%, I think?
Yeah, about 60%.
About 60% at the time. So there was a decision made, so okay, let's pick a premium pilot, number one. They actually had just done a redesign, and because we were attempting to do a proof of concept, we were not necessarily trying to challenge the idea of design. So they just had done a site, redesigned it, but it was in Rosebud, and we said, okay, this is the perfect site. Just, what was it, maybe 2 months ago, that they had already had wireframes and designs. So we essentially just took those same wireframes and designs and quickly were able to start porting them to Drupal. But within that port to Drupal, we then attempted to layer in this idea of a template, because they then wanted to be able to take that same pilot and kind of reuse it. So going back to Jeff's presentation, he had mentioned a number of takeaways, as they say, and reusability is definitely one that we took here with this pilot. We were also, because they were new to Drupal and they had finished training, we were bringing in coding standards, how you code things up. And so a part of that long-term plan is that not only were we coding the site for them, we had our leading architect there who were constantly answering questions for the team. So when they were working on something, he would be answering questions. So the proof of concept was, of course, that they were going to then be able to replicate this site to some of their other premium sites. There were core features. As he had mentioned, it's a financial site, so they had a number of financial applications that potentially would just be reused across their various premium sites and then just have them rethemed. There were a lot of legacy integration issues that we had to resolve, and that one of the things I think was for the first time we did a data migration for them and gave them a path for which they could do data migration, again, for future instances. Part of the site template, we spent a lot of time here in requirements gathering with their business folks and hearing their complaints about their current CMS and what it wasn't capable of doing. So although we were just simply porting a site, on the front end it was going to look essentially the same, the back end was completely different. The CMS had a bunch of new features in it, a lot of ability to customize that they did not have before. Simply just even being able to place images was completely different. I mean, it was kind of this bizarre, backward way that they would have to put an image on an actual article, whereas essentially most of you who've worked with Drupal know you can do it right inside the article. Again, in this case, we built out a number of blocks for them and allowed them to place them either in a 1-column or 2-column or 3-column, and that they would just expand. So that was something new for them. Although again, looking the same as it did in production before, it was very different on the back end. And that I just spoke about matching user requirements with core functionality in Drupal. We didn't do anything very special. I mean, we tweaked a few things here and there, but it was. I don't like to say Drupal out of the box that much because it's kind of cliche, but it pretty much was. So in terms of the handoff and making sure that the work that we were doing, that we were not just building within inside of a silo of sorts. As I said, we spent a great deal of time on site answering questions, keeping their development team and technical team very much involved with what we were working on. We often did code review, so then we would finish a particular large feature, or we would do a handoff, and we would walk their team through what we had done. We constantly remained, even when we left the engagement, we were available for questions, and that we still continue to be available during critical times. So at this point, the pilot results I'm going to let Justin handle because he can walk us best through those.
So a couple of the highlights here that we're going to talk about a little bit. Obviously, process improvements, operational business outcomes, and lessons learned. Again, it's a lot of the questions I usually get from people that I meet on the outside of like, all right, great, you guys are on Drupal. So how does it go? So there's the site right there. Our beta site that we launched with Treehouse was Options Profits. What we're looking at here is one of the street properties, one of our little niche brands that's basically geared specifically for options traders. There really aren't too many sites like this out there. There's a couple of like little portal sites off Yahoo Finance and stuff, but really what we have at the street is really unique because these are paid properties, these are paid sites, and what this is basically a collection of guys down on Wall Street who are all options traders, well known in the options business, all signed up that are only right for the street, and basically they manage their portfolios here. When you get access to this site, you access their portfolio data. That's kind of what this product is that it's a kind of a unique model where obviously we're filing content. We're using Drupal for the out-of-the-box features of, we file content to it, of course, but you can see we have a lot of other things going on here. There's some market data modules that we constructed over there on the right side. And for me, the model of these products is really unique of when you sign up for these things, basically you get an alert anytime there's a trade made by some of these guys, and you basically don't need to know anything about trading. You just got to follow the alerts, make the trades when they say to trade it, follow their portfolio, and at the end of the day, you'll see the positive, negative gain. Their portfolios are very good. They're quite pricey, these products, but at the end of the day, for people looking to get into options and don't know anything about it, these sites are really perfect for it. There's a lot of tutorials, and they do some free webinar stuff. So the site itself was a great model for us. It really had a lot of the core elements we spoke about before. I know I'm going to have little market data modules sitting on all of the sites at the street. Obviously, everything has financial data sitting on it. And everything else we're looking at here is kind of core for me, Drupal. It's just content. So going forward, I hate to be so reiterative, but the reusable aspect here for me is what really sold this thing. It's so important of our core CMS development obviously had publishing, had access control built in, and our market data. That's it. That's our core there. I could relaunch some of these other properties just with that alone and roll in some of the other features and modules as I go forward. And some of the custom stuff that we worked on, and this was stuff we had done with Treehouse kind of like post-launch. This was actually like a phase 2 to the product. We kept the relationship going. We had such success getting it out the door and the response to it that we obviously wanted to keep the relationship going with Treehouse as well. So we had gone forward and done some additional module development of Active Directory integration, making sure that if I log into one site, I can log into all of my sites with one username. That's really important. I don't want guys to create passwords all over the place for all of our properties. I needed a Drupal module that can do that. Trade Tracker is something unique for us. It's our proprietary little module that we had done with Treehouse. It basically lets you follow and track trades in real time on the fly. So if some of these traders are going in, making positive, negative gains, you see it. If it's a positive, you see it. It's a negative, you see it. There's no hiding what goes on in those portfolios. So it's important to have kind of like those applications created that I know I'm going to use that, again, across all my sites. And federated databases, it was an interesting thing that we did with Treehouse. I think I heard during Jeff's presentation a few minutes ago the concept of having a bunch of unified sites like the government sites, and maybe they're all using separate CMS systems. Well, at the street, we have limited bandwidth. I don't have government bandwidth. So we have a limited set of resources on the editorial side, and I don't want these guys logging into all these systems and filing content everywhere, especially since, I'm filing one article, and for argument's sake, I can use that on 3 sites. We want the right SEO rules in there, but I could do that. That's a workable model that I can publish content through one system and publish and disperse it to a couple of different sites. So we had worked with Treehouse on the federated database module development, which is basically that, of taking one CMS system and creating a unique workflow so I can file it intelligently to many sites and have different editors control the release process on that. They're all a little picky and they all want to insert their text. So that was part of that little module of making sure we had the right workflow built into Drupal to publish content, have editors review it, file it, publish it. We have a lot of contributors who send stuff in from all over the United States, and we really needed that database model kind of built for us because it's unique for us. And hopefully that's stuff we could push back out into the community. So, process improvements. On the content publishing side, like it says up here, there is no negative impact to publishing whatsoever. And that's kind of one of the things I always get from people looking at Drupal of like, how did it go? What happened in terms of the volume of content that you were producing? From day one, we didn't skip a heartbeat. We had, for the site options, we had about 30, 40 articles published per day before we went to Drupal. And right afterwards, we had about 30, 40 articles a day going to Drupal. The transition was easy. And for me, the feedback from the editors and the business side on that was so important. Because as I start to roll out to other sites and other properties and other groups, it's good to have that story. It's good to have that winning story behind us of, what, we did it, and it had no impact for us, so don't be scared to do it. We work with a lot of editors, like I said, who just aren't web-savvy guys. These guys are just pure writers. They don't know HTML. They don't know what a nav is if I'm talking about things. Some guys don't know what fonts are, which is incredible. But that was a big part of it. The content publishing had to be seamless. It had to be easy, and it had to have buy-in. We didn't talk about code releases at all, but when we talk about the efficiency of Drupal and iterative development, this is really important. On our legacy systems on the Java sites, we were releasing about once a week after hours. Usually took us about 2 hours to do a code release. It was pretty messy. We had a lot of things manually pushed and moved and migrated from server to server. It was really messy. Our releases were scary, to say the least. The day we switched over to Drupal, we immediately went from a weekly to a daily cycle. It was 1, 2, 3. We had brought in and started incorporating with our SVN repository tools like Hudson. Really went a long way for the one-button push and deploy things to staging, deploy it to QA, make sure people own those processes. Drupal makes that really, really easy for us. Looking at what we did with the Java sites and what we're doing at Drupal, it's not even close. Our release cycles now are simple, easy, and brainless. We get them done in about 10 minutes, which is where we really want to be with code releases. And it's easier in an iterative environment to do a smaller release. I don't want to waste 4 hours each week launching a huge stack of code. It's just not efficient for us. We need to have quicker wins. We need to get stuff out quicker, and Drupal really got us there. Getting that quick cycle really helped get the speed to market aspect of our core development out. And being able to launch something quickly. I can launch tonight, tomorrow, and the day after that. Obviously, site maintenance became easier because the nature of Drupal is config-based. For anybody who's worked on a proprietary or a legacy kind of system, I love the example of Drupal, and I see it at every convention, at every event, of people who couldn't change their navigation, right? You couldn't do it in the old way. You had to go in and put in a file, and these words don't fit, and you have to start messing with the CSS and the size of your navigation. It's a pain in the neck, but we really love that example in Drupal of it's really simple and it's flexible because I could do it through the configuration. I don't have to go in and deploy anything. I can go in on one of our Drupal sandboxes and just try it out. I'll put a new button in there, see what it looks like. If it looks good, just do it right on production, kind of 1, 2, 3. The config-based changes really took a load off of our development team. I think we mentioned before that out of our 15 guys that were doing development at TheStreet, at least half of those guys were doing maintenance. So I'm very limited right off the bat to how much new development I could do if I'm maintaining the old stuff. But going to Drupal really saves me a lot of time. I don't have to do any of that maintenance. It's self-sufficient. We're working with the guys on our editorial and our business development teams to do some of the configuration work for us. I don't want the editors to feel like they're restricted, that they can't add things to the site. Of course you can. You just need the right system to do it, right? So when we talk about team capabilities, this really opened the door for us because now I'm not doing as much maintenance and hand-holding on these little nitty-gritty things and killing a lot of our time. Now I can really focus on the core team of what kind of like new features do we really want to build, and working with some new technologies to bring in. And that's kind of where we went next. So on the business and operational outcome, we talked about speed to market, but the proof is in the pudding. So from the launch of Options Profits, we did 9 additional sites since then, about a site a month. Some sites are a little quicker. We did one in about 2 weeks and one in about a month and a half. Obviously, it varies with the size of the site and the content and the volume on there. But there's no time period in this history of TheStreet.com that we were able to launch sites as quickly and efficiently as we can do today. No doubt in my mind. Editorial training we talked about. Community's gotten really good at finding modules, and I love that. I love now when I go into meetings with clients and some of the guys at the street that are not tech savvy, instead of telling me, well, I really want to build a poll, and I want the poll to do this, and it would be cool if you did that, and we start wireframing this thing. Now they come in with, wow, I went to Drupal, and I found this really cool poll that's community shared. Look at all these other sites that are using it. Check out the reviews on this thing. Now really our development team isn't mired down with building specs and this custom thing anymore. Now it's really about trying out some public stuff. And it's better for me to have our developers doing more evaluating than building to some extent. That went a really long way because their knowledge of those modules goes a lot farther than the guys on the business side. And obviously building it ourselves wouldn't be any better either. So I like now that the guys are spending more time doing evaluations and looking for things that are available to us right now. You just kind of have to go and look for it and need a reason to find it. But I do love that the people on the business side at the street have started that process. And now that it's been 9 months into it, they do it on their own. And they surprise me every now and then with, hey, check this out, kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, you guys really went above and beyond here. This is pretty good. Let's try it out. And we just kind of plug it in on one of our sandboxes. It's an easier process than building and speccing everything ourselves, obviously. So business impact was really significant at the street. I think we picked a really good site to start with. Options became our number 2 selling product for the year in 2010, and it was only live for 3 months. They killed this thing. Possibly it was the niche audience and the need for a site like Options Profits out there in the trading world. But I have to think that Drupal went a long way to that, because without getting the site up, without getting those modules on there, the feedback from the community wouldn't have been there either. So that went a really long way at the street to kind of proving the point. Drupal is the way we want to go. Here's the model. Here's your proof of concept. Now go with it. So some of the other stuff that came up, and this is really part of the lessons learned for me of, even when we launched Options, it wasn't perfect. It was a little slow. So before we went into the next one, we know there's lessons learned on that. I think before we mentioned Varnish, we mentioned Akamai, and I put Memcache on here too. For me, these are absolutely critical. We can't launch any more Drupal sites without putting in caching the right way. We did have a couple instances of other sites that literally fell over when we launched them, when we didn't cache things correctly. Lesson learned the hard way on some of these things. But we know now that without the proper caching on Drupal, it really makes a lot, especially for sites that have heavy traffic loads. I'm always interested to see how people are using things like Varnish. Really, really powerful. Our developers have gotten really good at it, especially working with the guys at Treehouse who kind of showed us how they're using it and really how to take advantage of what Varnish can do. We actually went back and rebuilt some of our modules with Ajax. Some of the core development just really wasn't good enough. It was really slow. So going back in and Ajaxing some of these modules really affected the performance of the site tremendously, actually. Things that, again, I'm always the doubting Thomas on technology. Until I see it, I won't ever believe it. You just hear so many things. And I was blown away just between Ajaxing the modules on the Drupal site and the proper use of caching. Our site's completely stable. 100%. We have no problem with load on any of our sites. When we get a hit from Drudge and we get those 100 million hits in a day, no problem at all. Akamai, Varnish, they take care of all that stuff for us. And without that, I think I'd be a really stressed out guy. So limitations of Drupal, sure. Data storage and backup. I think before we talked about commerce for the government sites, entitlements. There's stuff that Drupal really doesn't do well yet, at least not that I've seen. So some of the directions that we've gone at the street are finding things that plugs into Drupal. I've been talking with some of the guys the last day or two about Salesforce. We're doing some really cool stuff, and that's basically at the street where we're using Salesforce to hold all of our data. I don't want to use Oracle on our Java sites to store things anymore. It's just way too expensive. It's just not financially. It just doesn't make sense for us in the long run. So, going to those models, using data storage in the cloud and connecting that with Drupal really changes the scope of what we're doing at TheStreet. All the data for Options Profits is stored in Salesforce. I'm not storing that in any of my local databases. I don't want that responsibility. We're a public company. I really don't want to get audited on this data. I need it to be 100% secure. I need it to sit somewhere where it never goes down. Our portfolios can't go down. Traders would be calling in every day. If one of these sites went down and you couldn't access your portfolio or you missed a couple of trades, that could potentially cost someone thousands of dollars if you miss one of these trades. So, that was really important for us that the data storage was there, it was stable, and connecting that with Drupal in a smart and intelligent way. So, just wrapping up, obviously, some of the stuff we're going to look forward to at TheStreet using Drupal is contributing back to the community. When we looked and when we started with Treehouse, we had gone and tried to find some financial modules that were shared in the community, and we really didn't find anything good. There's nothing really out there that blew us away in terms of something commonly used. So we're on top of that. We have our own modules coming that we're planning on contributing back, street modules that are, pure financial modules, very simple things, and hopefully the Drupal community could take advantage and use some of these things. We talked about cost savings, but that goes a long way for me to keeping our business owners and our senior management happy. I need to retire our old systems. Slowly, we've started to shut things off as more sites go Drupal. I'm shutting down some of these old systems. And basically what I'm left with now is our flagship site, TheStreet, which we're looking to start at the end of this year, and that'll be on Drupal sometime in 2012. So maintaining partnerships, I really can't say enough about the job for the guys at Treehouse that they did for us at TheStreet. I couldn't have done this myself, and I couldn't have done it with the team at TheStreet. Not that they're bad people. I have a brilliant team. But the outside expertise goes such a long way. We put down a couple of things here, leverage, and Nicole mentioned filling some of the gaps for us. We have a small team, so it's great to get that outside expertise in and fill in some of those gaps, like Nicole mentioned, the business analyst role. That doesn't exist for us at TheStreet. We don't have any BAs on site. So to have someone come in and work with us and know Drupal right out of the box, and now we're scoping things the right way. We're not wasting time putting things on paper and then trying to figure out how we're going to move it into Drupal. It was really important for us to have that experience up front, and that goes a long way. Me telling one of my stakeholders this is going to be good, that doesn't mean anything. But coming in from one of our expertise service providers, wow, now that means something. And it goes a really long way to having buy-in from the community of people who are experienced with Drupal, people who have credited and built sites out there that are stable, that are running and running well. That went a long way for us at TheStreet.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Earlier when you said Drupal didn't do entitlements,
Well, for us, we have about 85 to 100,000 subscribers. That's a lot of data in terms of storage for me. Right now, with all of our users, not only are we housing their personal data, of course, when you sign up for one of our products, your address, your credit card info, but I have to deal with portfolio data. Tremendous amounts of just financial data. There's just way too much for everybody. And when we started to store some of this in Drupal, it fell over. It just didn't handle it well. It slowed down to the pace where even with the right caching in, it wasn't the right model for me. I didn't want to store it all ourselves. I really wanted the power of storing that outside. And again, because we're a public company, which is unique for TheStreet, we get audited hard every year. We have auditors come in and they take a look at who has access to what, where is it hosted, how is it stored, how are you sourcing this stuff, and it had to be bulletproof. And I was glad to see that some of the options we looked at on the outside really solved that for us. And I guess for me, with Drupal, I guess just on the pure entitlement side, we just weren't comfortable with it enough. Because we were starting a pilot program and we were maybe biting off a little more than we can chew by putting all of it in. There's no doubt in my mind that we made the right call storing that on the outside and sourcing that stuff in.
talk a little bit more about the hardware and the savings that you're going through by making this change.
Sure. When Treehouse came in, go for it.
Well, I don't know how much you're licensing in, but I know it's a lot. But essentially, I know that there was a 2-year plan to phase out their Oracle licensing, and they also had another system called C3, which is essentially how, like on the premium products, when people would come in and register, that would be holding all the data. So there are a number of systems that are now being retired that will ultimately allow them to save how much? I don't know that number.
Yeah,
That's
well,
adjusted.
I will say our Oracle licenses are very pricey. You know, we're talking about a six-figure number each year on just Oracle licenses and maintaining all of it. You know, and for anybody who has proprietary systems, you know, you have legacy hardware that goes along with that. Systems that just sat there and build and are just running. Sometimes we don't even know what they're doing. They're just running. People are afraid to flip the switch on it. We don't know what's going to go off. So, you know, going into Drupal, we really wanted to start fresh. So we had started with some new hardware, keeping it siloed, keeping it separate. And as we start to roll things off, we knew there was no danger shutting off some of these old systems because the new stuff is up and running and it doesn't touch any of it. So for me, you know, a lot of the cost savings were obviously our Oracle licenses is huge, but shutting down some of those old systems, we obviously also save in our sysops team time, just time for the guys on the floor maintaining these old systems and trying to figure out which wires connect to what. You know, not only just the license side, but the people, man-hour time, there's a huge benefit there for us at the street. Yeah.
And then I know, like when we were actually looking at options profits, we found a computer under somebody's desk that was actually running a production app for that site. So there were little things like that. I mean, all of those things add up, and that there are sometimes even people attached to those apps.
That's right.
And supporting them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of companies must experience the same thing. It's just proprietary stuff.
And I'll just note, because it came up as a question, and I'm going to go ahead and jump in and say it. On Department of Energy, one of kind of the driving forces there was actually cost. And that when we talk about 500 sites sitting out there, those 500 sites all have people maintaining them, and sometimes entire development team, design teams, and everything else. So you can imagine how much money is being spent on maintaining all of these sites. So cost savings in finding a reusable model is pretty significant, and that this will be for a later presentation at another time, but those numbers will come out because they've actually published some numbers associated with the cost savings with the Department of Energy. So.
Justin, you've spoken about training up your internal team. I know that's a big concern for a lot of companies that are looking to possibly choose Drupal. That this idea of a talent shortage, where am I going to get my developers? So you, like a lot of kind of enterprise clients, are choosing to train up. Can you just give us a little bit of the success
Sure.
Story there?
Yeah, I can't underscore this enough that without the proper training with the guys on site, we would have gone nowhere fast. It would have been great. Treehouse would have come in, built the site, and here you go, and can't do anything. We knew on day one that we had a problem, with just people. Not that we didn't have talented developers. Like I said, we had a great team. But more importantly, I was lucky enough to have a team that was willing and open to doing this. They really wanted to personally learn PHP. They wanted to learn Drupal. These are guys who are, really into the development communities in general, and this was a big thing for them. They all wanted to do this. So, I'm glad to see that at least, we had the right people at the street that were open to the training. And, I mentioned Lullabot before. Lullabot came in for 2 weeks on site and just did hardcore training with us, everything from top to bottom of where you start to where you should finish. That really went such a long way for us to keeping the code that Treehouse gave us. And obviously, we were doing knowledge transfers and code reviews with them. But if you can't maintain it yourself, you're not going to get very far. So that was critical for us to be successful, especially when you talk about speed to market.
And I'll just real quick give you a number. On another engagement, I won't mention the name, we did also recommend that they do an upfront training with Lullabot, but they didn't decide to do it. By the end of the engagement, after we had finished development, they had lost every single one of their internal developers, just to give you an example. So I cannot reiterate enough that they actually maintained most of their development team and have continued to maintain, where I've been on another project where they lost every single person because they did not train them up and they did not understand what was going on and they did not buy in. So.
Just to counter, I think what I was really getting at, I want to make sure that I understand it and that it's clear. Those guys also really hit the ground running after that training, because a lot of people worry about this ramp up of training.
Mm-hmm.
Your guys, essentially, we loved doing the project with the street, but at the end of the day, we were gone.
Yep.
It was your internal team that moved forward, and it seems like they hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, when we started the handoff process, obviously there was a little time in between of when we did the training with Lullabot and we had started the project with Treehouse. And we had just done some experimental stuff. I think I mentioned before, we kind of just started building blogs. I needed to build something quick just to see how it worked and how fast they can really start moving forward with this stuff, purely experimental. It was something I could use. Our editors really wanted a couple blogs to play with, and they're out using WordPress and these one-off things. And we really wanted to keep all this content in-house. I don't want these guys going out and doing things independently on their own. So that's kind of the way we hit it. We started to build just a couple of really small things in tandem to while we were building Options Profits with you guys. And that way we had a little practice. And the guys were prepared with plenty of questions by the time we were wrapping up and doing some of that code review of, how did you guys do this? Here's how we thought we were doing it. And, that initial kind of knowledge transfer, I think, got us from, step 2 to step 5 right off the bat.
My question was about your the business analyst role that you kind of fulfilled. How was that role utilized? What were some of the requirements, or what was that person actually doing, and some of the decisions that were eventually made because of that?
We did a couple things. In some cases, I played that role, because I'm pretty familiar with the CMS portion, and so I was able to identify a feature set that I could hear from the dialogue that they were missing, and when we walked them through their old CMS system, and they're like, oh, pain point, horrible, we can't do this. It was just taking notes and then essentially coming back at them saying, okay, this is how long, just listing those new capabilities out and saying, this is how long it's going to take to build, prioritize, because they didn't actually get everything that they wanted, because remember, they had a 2-month timeline. So that was kind of phase 1. But then they had things like Trade Tracker, which were applications. So we had a gentleman who actually worked on with Bloomberg, I believe it was, and so he had somewhat of a background, an industry background, and also in the web. He came in and sat with their business folks, and then sat and did more detailed requirements around their specific apps that they wanted. He would wireframe them up and then write some of the functionality out as to what they would want to do. He'd pass them off to our developers. They would look at them, give them a sanity check, and say, okay, this makes sense. We would then walk the business team back through it. They'd say, yes, this is what we want. We'd put an estimate on it, and we would build it. So that was pretty much the BA role. Question?
Who did you choose as your host, and what is the type of database that you're using?
Well, our host right now, I'd rather have our sysops guy give you the right info on it, because I don't want to mislead you on any of the hosting stuff. But all of our stuff right now is hosted at an external data center in New Jersey. We've gone out of the old system, which was basically all done on site, proprietary systems that were basically in a closet. All our servers were kind of sitting there. So we basically retired a lot of that stuff, and we're using basically Equinox, I think, is the system out in Jersey that's doing a lot of our data storage, literally. And the rest of it is hosted in the cloud in Salesforce.
All right, it's a little after 3, so I think we can wrap. Thank you so much.